Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to the session on DevOps. Before getting started, let me introduce myself. My name is Ravi and I'm one of the expert trainers in DevOps. Today we're going to discuss about DevOps. Here is the agenda. Why DevOps? So DevOps is a buzzword in recent times and a lot of people and organizations are using it frequently. Let's see why this has become so prominent nowadays. What are the biggest benefits of it? All of these questions will be answered in this session. Let me first make it clear that DevOps is not a technology, a tool, or any innovative framework. It is a culture of an organization where the software lifecycle management is in the main focus. Before deep diving into DevOps, let's understand the scenario before DevOps. Before DevOps. When the software industries have evolved, they started with a model called Waterfall Model. This was the first model the software industries used to follow. This was a very successful model at times, but not anymore because of current market trend. Let's see the different phases and the disadvantages of this model first. So if you take a look at it, these are the different phases that are available in waterfall model during this software development. So requirement analysis, design phase, development phase, testing, and finally the maintenance. This is the phases that are involved in the software lifecycle management. And it does has some challenges or the disadvantages. Over here, we're gonna discuss about this and why this has been not working anymore in the current trend of the market. So before that, let's understand each and every phase in detail and let's find out what are the challenges behind that. Okay, let me go to my sketchboard and walk you through. Yep. So these are the different phases, and in each phase, a team is involved. And so this is the first phase of the software development where there is a requirement analysis phase, the design phase, coding phase, and so on and so forth. So in the requirement phase, the client is involved where he's going to capture all the requirements of this particular project and it's been passed on to the next team. Now in this case, in the waterfall model, the client would capture the requirements. Let's suppose there are 5 requirements. It is going to work on these 5 requirements, capture all of these 5 requirements in a document, and once it is done, it's been passed on to the design team. Now the design team start working on this document to design the requirements, as well as there are a lot of other discussions also will go on, like finding out the technology, finding out the servers, and so on and so forth, along with the design of these requirements. Once this design is done, it's been passed on to the coding team. Now the coding team will start coding these requirements in the respective technology they have been decided by this design team. Now once the coding is done, it's been passed on to testing team does the testing, and finally this is being implemented onto a non-production environment. Once the testing team signs off, this has been deployed onto the non-production environment, and finally it's been reviewed with the client back to get the sign-off from the client, showing all these requirements in a non-production environment and get the sign-off from the client. So this is the flow that the waterfall model has with all these phases. Now let's see some of the challenges that are there with the current times. When the client is working on these requirements, let's suppose took 1 month for him to get these requirements done, all the requirements. And once this has been done and has been passed on to the design team, now maybe the design team might have taken 1 month time to get this design for all these requirements. And the coding team has took 2 months, testing has taken 2 weeks, and the implementation team has taken 2 weeks. Overall, it is like around, let's suppose it has taken 5 months of time to complete this entire project, which is of 5 requirements. So if you keenly observe, what is happening over here is at one point of time, only one team is working, which means that when the requirements are done or gathered by this client, the client is super busy. He's busy in getting all these requirements. And the rest of the teams are not occupied or not doing anything with respect to this project. Maybe they might have been assigned to some other project in the meanwhile, but ideally they're not occupied for this project. Now once the document is ready, it's been passed on to the design team. Now design team is fully occupied by designing all these requirements. Now the client is relieved, and the other teams are waiting for the design document to start their work, isn't it? So now the design team is fully occupied. Now once it has been done, it's been passed on to the coding team, which is a development team, normally we call, and these team is fully occupied now. So with this, what we can make out is at one point of time, only one team is fully involved. This is the first drawback in waterfall model. And the second drawback is, now that this complete project took 5 months to complete this project, now there would be a chance of, out of these 5 requirements, you are coming back to the client after 5 months to review it with your client, all these 5 requirements. Maybe during this 5 month tenure, maybe one of the requirement might get outdated with the current trend of the market, because nowadays the market is picking up very fast. Maybe this was a requirement which was not there before 5 months, but now you took almost 5 months to complete all of these requirements or this project. Maybe now at this point of time, one of these requirements might get outdated. Maybe some other organization or some other company has already implemented this particular requirement. Maybe that is outdated. This could be a chance. Second disadvantage is, let's say when the coding team is working on these requirements and they have almost spent a month on this, and they are in the middle of this project. Now all of a sudden the client comes in and he would ask for any new requirement, let's suppose, and we are good to take it. But the thing is, if this new requirement is a top priority requirement and the design team realizes that this new requirement, by adding on to this project, maybe impact the design that they have done for all the other 5 requirements. Maybe they have to redo the complete design, which means that maybe the effort that I have spent so far might go waste, because they have to redesign the entire project. New requirement, maybe there will be a chance of redo. So these are the three main disadvantages. One is one team is occupied fully at one point of time, and the second one is the outdating of the requirements, because it is taking too much of a time. And this is something like, I just gave a very high level timeline, but normally it would take more than this. And the third one is any new requirement in the middle of this project, maybe there would be a chance of redoing the entire design. I'm talking of the worst scenario. If there is no redo of a design, then we are good. But if there is a chance of redo, then that is a big impact on the project timeline. So these are the few challenges that were there with the waterfall model. But this was a very successful model at times, like 15-20 years back, because that time the market was not this much fast. But nowadays the market is changing on a every day to day. So maybe this model will not anyway going to work in the current times, because this is a very slow process. Now, since there are a lot of challenges, after some time there is a new model came into picture, and if you follow that model, what it is guaranteeing is what are the challenges that we are facing, like new requirement restart the development, and it is a slow process, and the things get outdated, and at one point of time only one team is occupied fully. All these drawbacks which are there with the waterfall model will be resolved, and that model is agile model. Now let's see what this agile model is. Agile basically says one thing, that is you run the project in multiple sprints, which means that multiple cycles of all these phases. Let's say this is the entire life cycle of the project, but what agile says is split it into multiple cycles. This, take one piece of the project, maybe one requirement, and run it through all these phases, that is called as one cycle, and take the other requirement, run it through all these phases, that is other cycle. So these cycles are logically called as sprints. So, and each sprint, it is strictly says that each sprint has to be completed within 2 to 3 weeks of time. Now let's understand how this is possible. Let's take the same example. Let me go back to my sketchboard. Now this is the same example. Now that what I'm going to do is, now this is an agile model. We understood what is a waterfall model. Now we are talking about the agile model, how the challenges that we have seen in waterfall model is being resolved with the agile. In agile, what it says is a client, when he's working on these requirements, it is not necessarily needed to complete all the requirements and hand it over to the design team. Whereas in waterfall model, the client used to work on all the requirements in that project, and once he has done with the complete document, then he used to pass it on to the next team. But what Agile says is you don't need to work on the entire requirements. Let's say you are done with the first requirement, now pass it on to the design team. Now the design team will start working on this first requirement. Now in the meanwhile, the client will work on the other requirements. Now the design team works on the first requirement. Once the design is done for this first requirement, it's been passed on to the coding, and the coding team starts working on the first requirement. In the meanwhile, if the client is ready with the other requirement, that has been passed on to it, so on, so forth. So with this, what is happening is there is no team at one point of time is working alone. Like every team here is working parallelly, because we are not waiting for the entire requirements to complete. So as in one the requirement is ready, it's been passed on to the next team, and once this is ready, it's been passed on. This is ready, it's been passed on. So so and so forth. Like every team is equally occupied until all these 10 requirements are complete. Now in this case, I said like going through all the phases is one cycle, and which is like one sprint, which is of 2 to 3 weeks of time. What does this mean? Let's suppose the client is ready with the first requirement and he's started working on the other requirement. The first requirement has been given to the design team. Now the design team started working on it, and so on and so forth. By the end of the 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the first requirement is ready. In the meanwhile, they are working on the second, or any other requirement which is on the top priority list. Now after 2 to 3 weeks, which is like this is sprint 1, it has been reviewed with the client, asking for his feedback, whether is it the same requirement that is what expected, or is something different than what we have implemented. So once that is signed off, this is done. Now in the meanwhile, the other teams are working on the other requirement, that will be considered into the sprint 2. So on and so forth. You are reviewing with the client every 2 to 3 weeks. Now this is called Agile model. Like everything will be in the form of sprints, and each project will be having multiple sprints. Now let's see whether those issues which we have seen, or the challenges that we have seen in the waterfall model has been resolved or not. The first thing is, at one point of time only one team is occupied in waterfall model. Now here in this case it is completely different, isn't it? So the requirement is ready, it's been passed on, the design team started working on it and it's been passed on. In the meanwhile, second requirement comes in, and so on and so forth. So no team is idle. So everybody is occupied and everybody is parallelly working on this project. First challenge is gone. The second challenge was outdated. So earlier the waterfall model used to take 5 months, 6 months, maybe 1 year, maybe more than that. Right after that, your complete projects are complete, requirements of that project are complete. Then you used to review with your client to seek for the feedback. But in Agile, you are taking the feedback every 2 to 3 weeks, which means that the chances of outdatation of any requirement is very less, because within 2 to 3 weeks nothing's gonna change. If it's gonna change also, you're gonna add that and you start doing the development. Because if at all, if that is outdated, maybe you might lose 2 to 3 weeks of time, but not as the entire project timeline. So with that, there is no chance of outdatation because it is a very short period, a very short cycle for each phase, which is called as a sprint in Agile. Now, what was the last challenge? Any new requirement, if there is any change in the entire design. Yes, so that was the biggest challenge in waterfall model. Let's see in Agile how it is being resolved. Now, when the first requirement is being worked on, it has been passed on, and 2 to 3 weeks it has been done, and you have reviewed with the client after 2 to 3 weeks. Now, at this review, or maybe when he is giving the feedback, maybe he said, let's add another requirement which is a top priority for me. All right, so we have taken this requirement. Now, in my next sprint, I'm going to take this sixth requirement as a top priority because that is a priority for the client. So when I take a look at this, we found that there should be a change in the design of what we have done so far. So what we have done so far, it is just a first requirement, isn't it? So if there is a change, the major change in the design, maybe we have to redesign it for sure. But what is something that we are losing over here is maybe a 2 to 3 weeks of time, but not a timeline of 5 months, which was before in waterfall model. So you'll not be losing, or you'll not be losing much of an effort that you have spent, because you haven't spent an effort or you haven't designed for the entire project, because you just spent only for the few of the requirements. Maybe that has to be redesigned, and obviously you need to redo it, and you might be losing weeks of time but not months or years of time. So new requirement, no big impact. So with this, the Agile has resolved almost all the challenges that we're facing with the waterfall model. Then, since Agile is a very successful model now, why do we need any other new model? So waterfall has its challenges, and now Agile has come in. Agile has fixed all of those issues what were there with the waterfall model. Now it is successfully running this model. I think 80% of the companies now are using Agile, and this is mostly focused on software development. So since this is making all of those possibilities, the challenges that are there with the waterfall model has been fixed, why do you need to go to any other model further. The reason is even Agile has some drawbacks. Let's see what those drawbacks are. First and foremost thing, product is not tested in the production systems. And the other challenge is that developers and operations work in silos. What does that mean? Now, let's see that. Now, the first and foremost thing is if you keenly observe this, everything is being done in the form of sprints. Everything is done within sprints in Agile. Now, once this testing is done and it has been implemented, this is implemented in the non-production environment and has been reviewed with the client. But when I say project is delivered, it is not something has to be implemented or deployed in a non-production environment. It has to be deployed on the production environment, not on the non-production environment. That is when I would say the product or project is delivered, isn't it? So, but what Agile says is to get the feedback from the client and get this signed off, but it is nowhere talking about the delivery of the project, but in fact it is talking about the development of the project or the product, right? So I do not see any phase where it is being deployed under the production environment in Agile. So this is the one of the biggest drawback in Agile. Yes, Agile does the faster software development because it has been now, utilize this time very effectively so that every team is working parallelly and get the product developed much faster, isn't it? But whether this is being delivered is something that is not, considered in Agile. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, the second challenge was, now this has been in a non-production environment. To do it deployed into the production, this team will never be doing the deployment into production. There should be another team which is called a ops team, which does the deployment to production environment, isn't it? So let's say this product is ready with all the coding, testing, even the client has signed off. Now I have to go to this operations team. This team has to go to the operations team and ask them to do the deployment. Maybe during that time the ops team is completely busy in doing the other project deployment and they are not ready to do your deployment, which in fact you are losing your timeline. Maybe you have completed your project within the timeline, let's say it is done in 3 months and you have given a timeline of to the client within 3 months and you're done with the development, but it's not that you have delivered. Only when it is delivered, it is said as a product is complete. Just that you have put it in a non-production environment and get it signed off with the client, that doesn't mean that the product is delivered or the project is complete. Only when it is deployed under the production, it is being delivered. So this production deployment is being taken care by then another team called operations team, which is called ops team. But you need to make sure whenever you are ready with the production deployment, whether this operations team is available to do your deployment or not, because operations teams are common teams which does the deployments of all the other projects. They don't do the deployments for only your project. Across the organization, all the projects are being taken care by this ops team to deploy onto production. So we need to have a very good collaboration between this operations team and this team, the development team, so that you know what is the timeline, what is the bandwidth, what is the availability of this operations team, so that you can plan accordingly to push your project into production. So this is something which is lacking in Agile. The first thing is it has been tested in non-production environment. That's the first challenge. And the second challenge is the operations team is nowhere involved in doing the production deployment. And this has been pulled in only at the time of when the product is ready. but by the time we never know the operations team is ready to take our request to do the deployment or not. So these are the two main challenges with respect to agile model. Otherwise, agile was very successful model which runs everything in the form of sprints and which leads to the faster development of the product. But it is missing the piece of product delivery. So that is something which is being addressed by DevOps. Now let's see what is a DevOps. And that is where DevOps has come into picture. Before I get deep dive into DevOps, let's see what it is. Dev and Ops, these are two different teams. That's what we are talking about. So this is the book's definition. DevOps is a software development strategy. It is not a technology, as I have mentioned earlier at the start of this session. Now, since Agile is a successful model for the software development, and DevOps is an advancement of the Agile. How it is? Let's see. Now, what it says is, Agile is client plus dev team, isn't it? Agile is client plus dev team, which you see a client and dev. Now, what is something it is missing with Agile is operations team. So what DevOps has done is it has added ops team to it, and this is called as DevOps. This is called as DevOps. So this is an operations piece, and in DevOps this entire piece is called as dev. So that is where this is dev plus ops. So to become a DevOps or to follow a DevOps process, you need to be agile first, because DevOps internally uses agile, which is a client and dev team. This together is called as a dev team in DevOps, and the missing piece is the operations team. It has been plugged in this operations team as part of this process. That is where this has become DevOps, dev plus ops. So at a very high level, it is an extension of agile, I would say, but we should not say agile extension. The name, you call it as dev plus ops, which is development team plus operations team. That's what the collaboration between these two teams is called DevOps. Now let's see how this can be done. So DevOps has been defined the phases. Now that in agile model or in a waterfall model, we have different phases like requirement phase, design phase, coding phase, and so on and so forth. Since now the DevOps has come in with a broader picture, like including the development team and the operations team, so it has many phases. So they have aggregated few of them and renamed the phases like continuous development, continuous integration, continuous testing, and so on and so forth. And this is what the life cycle of DevOps. What do you mean by life cycle? Let's see what it is. As I mentioned, DevOps is itself using Agile, and it is extended with the operations team activities. Now, if you see the one that you see in blue font or in a blue color is something which are the phases of Agile, which is part of our sprint. If you remember, let me go back. If you see here in the sprint one, you have all these phases, and sprint two, you have all these phases. These are the phases of Agile in every sprint, isn't it? Now, as I said, DevOps inbuilt, it has Agile and it has extended with the operations team. The one that you see in blue is Agile phases, and the one that you see in yellow is operations team phases, which are like operation team activities: release, deploy, and operate. And why it has been put it in this way? The reason is this is a continuous process. Why I said it's a continuous process? because at the planning stage you took the first requirement and started designing it and then coding it and then building it and testing it and then passed on to the release team and so on and so forth. In the meanwhile, the design team will come with the second requirement, start the coding, and then so on and so forth. So this is a continuous process until all the requirements have been completed for that particular project. And that is the reason this has been put as a sleeping 8, which internally says is a continuous process. That's where, like, in DevOps, every phase is being named as a continuous development or continuous integration, which is everything is a continuous process until all your requirements are complete for that particular project. Right. So let's see a few of the tools. So how this can be achieved? As I said, it is a combination of development team and an operations team. How you want to collaborate between these two teams. This is possible by using some of the DevOps tools, recommended tools, and it is need not be the tools that which DevOps is suggesting. It can be any tool which satisfies the underlying concept of DevOps. You can use any tool which satisfies the concept of DevOps. But in this case, in this slide, I have put some of the popular tools which most of the industries are being used. Okay, and as part of this course, we're going to learn all of these tools as part of this course. Now, if you take a look at this slide, the ones that you see on the left hand side, these are the phases of development team. And the ones that you see on the right hand side is that these are the phases, like deploy, operate, monitor. These are the phases of operations team. And how do we collaborate between these two teams is with a phase called integration, continuous integration. So if you take a look at it, every phase has a particular software or a tool which would support that phase to perform or stick to the DevOps process. So we're going to learn one tool in each phase, and we see the complete pipeline of the DevOps entire lifecycle, starting from the planning to monitor. Right? On the left hand side, I put few of the popular tools which most of the industries have been using it, and we're going to learn all of this. Moving on, this is the complete life cycle, like pipeline of the DevOps. Starting from the planning, coding, build. These are the different phases of the dev team, and these phases of the operations team. As I told you, why I put this is a sequential process. Let's suppose planning, coding, and at the time of testing, if there is any issue, it will not go to the next phase. It will come back and report it to the respective team, saying that the test has been failed for one of these code changes or one of this requirement. Please go and check. So that the respective team will start working on this and fix it. Until this has been tested fine and signed off, it will not go to the next phase. Now once this is done, this is an integration phase. It's been passed on when it is success to the operations team. Then these are the activities of operations team. And anything goes wrong over here, it's going to again revert back to the respective team to take care of it and fix it. Until it is fixed or resolved, it will never ever go to the next phase. And this is completely automated. There is no manual intervention. This is a DevOps pipeline at a very high level and very simple pipeline. Right? So this is the process of a DevOps. And there won't be any manual intervention. Once you create a pipeline, it is set. Last but not the least, the advantages of DevOps. With all this understood, like these are the few advantages I put it. One is time taken to create and deliver the software is reduced. The reason is, yes, it is following a agile inbuilt, because every requirement has been taken separately in a sprint and it's been worked on and it's been implemented. And it is a continuous process until all your requirements are being met. Second advantage is the complexity of maintaining the application is reduced. Definitely yes. The reason is you are working on requirement by requirement. It is not something we have taken all the requirements at one time and started working on it. We are picking one of the requirements or like two of the requirements into a sprint, and then we are working on. Let's suppose in sprint 1 everything went fine, and when I'm working on the sprint 2, maybe I've taken the second requirement, I'm working on it, there is some issue. So I now need to go back to the sprint 1 code and take a look at it. Rather, I'll go and check only the sprint 2 piece of code and check it. With this, what's happening is I'm narrowing down my issue, where exactly it's gonna be the actual problem. So that is where the complexity of maintaining the application will be reduced. Now, improved collaboration between developers and operations team, that we understood is theoretically, because DevOps is making this possible by adding the operations team activities also into their life cycle. Theoretically we understood, but practically we have to understand this, so that we're gonna see that in our later sessions. Continuous integration and delivery ensure the faster time to the market. Obviously, yes, because this is a continuous process starting from the planning to the monitoring. Entire project is delivered, and this is done in a phase by phase, like every 2 to 3 weeks in the form of sprints. So it is an incremental process of building your project, and it is always much faster when compared to clubbing everything into one and releasing it all at once. So with this, we're done with the high level introduction of what is a DevOps and how it has been evolved and why it has become so prominent in the market nowadays. Thank you so much. See you in our next session. Thank you. Happy learning.